Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí en esta segunda sesión. Es un honor para nosotros darles la bienvenida. Les recuerdo que esta serie de 6 espacios busca profundizar en el tema de metaverso desde una perspectiva latinoamericana. Entonces, la mayoría de nuestros ponentes son de la región. Y algo importante que voy a mencionar en 2 idiomas antes de que siga hablando es que hoy tenemos a ponentes que hablan inglés y español. Entonces, si ustedes prefieren escuchar toda esta parte, todo el diálogo en español, por favor, váyanse abajo de su pantalla, en la parte donde, creo que es más bien por aquí, donde dice interpretación y píquenle al botón en español y así todo tendrán la parte de inglés traducida a español. Now, in case there's people joining us who speak English, I'm just going to recap all of that. Welcome. Thank you for being here in the second dialogue space of our series, Metaverse, Future Opportunities by CMind's Eon Resilience Lab and Meta. Today, we're going to be talking about economic impact, how we can translate the growth in this digital world to the physical world, metanomics, social impact, inclusion, future of work, and a lot more topics. So this event is going to be conducted mainly in Spanish, but a lot of our speakers do speak English. So if you want to listen to all of this event in English, just go to the bottom of your screen where it says interpretation and hit English. And then you will have no problem following. Now I will switch back to Spanish, so be sure to be in English if you speak English. Perfecto. Entonces, espero que todos me escuchen. Cualquier problema, por favor, pónganlo en el chat. Vamos a estar muy atentas. Algunos puntos antes de avanzar. Para las personas que nos sigan en Facebook, por favor, sé que salen subtítulos en automático, que esconde la mitad de la pantalla. Los pueden quitar con la función subtítulos y los eliminan y es una experiencia muchísimo más agradable. If you are in Facebook and want to listen to the event in English, please connect to the Zoom session because that is where we're having the live translation. También por aquí tenemos el chat en Zoom. Buenos días a todos. Me encanta ver que se unen desde muchísimos países de la región, desde Chile, Colombia, México, Argentina, algunos desde Washington. Qué gusto ver el alcance de este evento. Y no duden en utilizar el chat para compartir información. Nada más les pedimos, por favor, no usarlo para promover productos y servicios, que nos pasó bastante la última vez y fue mucho ruido durante el evento. Importante, si tienen preguntas, por favor no las pongan en el chat, porque luego se mueve muy rápido. Aquí abajo tienen la función Q&A o preguntas, pónganlas ahí. Nuestros ponentes y nuestras ponentes las pueden contestar escrito durante el evento y también tendremos un espacio al final para que puedan realizar preguntas a las personas ponentes y que las contesten de forma general. Y listo, creo que esos son todos los anuncios. Pues mucho gusto, yo soy Claudia del Pozo, directora del Eon Resilience Lab de CMind. Y sin más, le voy a estar pasando la palabra a Glenda Michel, que fue clave en hacer que este evento pueda suceder. Glenda es directora de política pública de Meta México y nos va a dar unas palabras sobre un reporte que acaba de salir sobre el metaverso y temas de economía. Muchas gracias, Glenda. Adelante.
Muchas gracias, Claudia, y a todo el equipo de CMinds otra vez por hacer esta segunda conversación posible. Y buenos días a todas y todos. De verdad es nuevamente un placer ver el interés que existe por este tema. Estoy muy emocionada por la conversación que vamos a tener a continuación sobre las oportunidades de crecimiento que el metaverso va a detonar en distintos ámbitos. Pero pues antes de dar paso a este evento, justo quisiera dar un poco de contexto a esta charla con 2 puntos. Primero, ¿qué es el metaverso? Y segundo, ¿qué impacto económico estimamos que genere? Entonces, primero, aunque ya discutimos en la primera sesión los conceptos importantes alrededor del metaverso, creo que vale la pena recapitular algunos para imaginarnos estos posibles impactos de los que se van a mencionar a continuación, ¿no? ¿qué es lo que queremos recapitular? Pues primero que podemos pensar en el metaverso como este sucesor o la evolución del Internet, ¿no? Así que en esta próxima conversación quisiera que tengan en cuenta lo que esta red de redes, el Internet, ha significado en nuestras vidas en las últimas 3 décadas, para podernos imaginar también lo que el metaverso va a traer, ¿no? En segundo, que el metaverso pues es este conjunto de espacios virtuales, digitales, interconectados, síncronos, que suceden al mismo tiempo, que nos van a poder permitir relacionarnos con otras personas incluso cuando no están en el mismo espacio físico que nosotros, y que nos va a permitir vivir experiencias inmersivas justo combinando el mundo virtual con el mundo físico, ¿no? Y esto también se va a valer de una combinación de tecnologías que, si bien van a seguir evolucionando, también existen ya hoy y hoy ya son usadas, ¿no? Y estoy hablando de realidad aumentada, realidad virtual y mixta, blockchain y los tokens no fungibles, NFTs, que seguramente muchos de nuestros speakers más tarde van a mencionar. Entonces, digo, esto es como para que podamos tener en cuenta estas consideraciones ahora que vayamos a platicar. Y en segundo, si pueden, por favor, compartir la presentación, un par de slides, es qué impacto económico estimamos que genere esta innovación. Y para responder eso, pues les quiero compartir este estudio que acaba de publicarse, elaborado por los expertos en economía de Analysis Group, que es una de las mayores firmas consultoras de economía internacional, y que fue financiado por Meta, este estudio. Entonces, se titula The Potential Global Economic Impact of the Metaverse, el potencial económico global del metaverso, y brinda un estimado sobre justamente este impacto que va a tener el metaverso si su adopción e impacto evolucionaran de la misma manera o de forma muy similar a la tecnología móvil, que justamente ha tenido muchísimos beneficios y ha transformado distintas industrias, ¿no? Al igual que la tecnología móvil, esperamos que el metaverso tenga aplicaciones de gran alcance con el potencial de transformar una amplia gama de sectores económicos, desde la educación, la atención a la salud, la manufactura, capacitación laboral, entretenimiento, comunicaciones, el comercio. Y con todo esto, si quieren, siguiente slide. Analysis Group estima que si comenzáramos desde este mismo año, desde 2022, la adopción del metaverso, en los próximos 10 años va a significar una contribución de $3 billones al PIB mundial. Esto sería ya en 2031, lo cual significa 2.8% del PIB global. Y siguiente, y en América Latina, esta contribución del PIB sería de $320 millones, es decir, 5% del PIB de la región. La verdad es que estas cifras pues son importantes, y conforme los usuarios, nosotros mismos, continuamos adoptando estas tecnologías, pues este potencial de transformación social y económico va a ser todavía mayor, incluso de formas que hoy no podemos predecir ni estimar, ¿no? Pero bueno, solo los quería dejar con estas cifras, creo que para sumar más perspectivas sobre esto. Ahora sí los quiero dejar con los speakers el día de hoy, y para tener esta conversación más interesante y poder todavía imaginarnos más allá hacia dónde vamos con estas oportunidades. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a ti, Glenda. Excelentes datos. La verdad es que siempre es interesante ver cuando hablamos de nuevas tecnologías, siempre podemos ver como cuánto va a agregar al PIB global, pero pues la pregunta es sí, pero ¿cómo se va a distribuir? Entonces, qué bueno que tengan ya datos sobre América Latina. Muchas gracias por haber compartido esta presentación. Antes de pasar a las siguientes partes de este evento, me gustaría empezar con, bueno, primero unas aclaraciones más. Por favor, asegúrense de estar registrados a este evento para que les llegue tanto la grabación como los recursos compartidos, por ejemplo, la presentación que acaba de poner Glenda. Y algo importante es que si están registrados a este evento, no significa que automáticamente estén registrados para los siguientes que vamos a tener como parte de esta serie. Por favor, no se les olvide registrarse a los siguientes también. Y antes que nada, también quisiera agradecer a nuestros socios de difusión que hicieron un gran trabajo asegurándose que este evento y la información compartida llegue al mayor número de personas en la región. Quisiera agradecer al Centro I, al Laboratorio de Emprendimiento y Transformación, al Centro Universitario de Ciencias Económico-Administrativas, al PIT Policy Lab, a Move Lab, a De Cero a Ciencia de Datos, el Laboratorio de Innovación Cívica de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México y a la Alta Consejería TIC Bogotá. Si quisieran unirse como socios de difusión, por favor, pónganse en contacto con nosotros. Y bueno, empecemos entonces con una introducción a este tema tan interesante, enfocado en metaverso y economía. Vamos a tener una introducción por parte de Kayla Grant. Kayla es de Jamaica y actualmente trabaja en el BID. Kayla es la asociada senior del sector en el Departamento de Competitividad, Tecnología e Innovación del BID, del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Tiene más de 9 años de experiencia en el diseño, desarrollo y evaluación de programas de competitividad, tecnología e innovación dentro del programa sectorial Compete Caribbean de instituciones para el Desarrollo. Tiene una maestría en Economía, Gestión y Tecnología de la Innovación por la Universidad de Alcalá. Como verán, los panelistas y las panelistas en esta sesión son muy diversos y ahora, después de la presentación de Kayla, me dará gusto presentarle a los y las demás. Kayla, muchas gracias por estar aquí, qué gusto. Y adelante, por favor. Ahora te subimos la presentación.
Súper. Ok, súper. Gracias, Claudia. Y hola a todos. I'll switch over to English. Thank you so much, Claudia, for the introduction. And thank you to Eon Resilience Lab of C-Minds and Meta for having me here today as a representative from the IDB. And I'm so glad for the earlier presentation because indeed putting an economic value on the metaverse is something that is very challenging. And as we see the technologies that are involved in the metaverse evolved, we'll also be seeing the fact that these economic valuations will be changing. But nevertheless, there is consensus on the huge potential that the metaverse will have in our world. I want to start off this very brief introduction that we're having towards the panel by taking a bit of a historical perspective, which I know was done a little bit yesterday, just because it's quite fascinating, the fact of how we're able to share ideas today about emerging technologies and their development and essentially the direction that we would like to see that development take. And it still boggles me that just 50, 60 years ago, the computer weighed more than 16,000 pounds. 30, 40 years ago when ARPANET was developed, the discussions taking place then were really special access only. It was limited to just a few people who were in certain academic and research spheres that were designing what the internet would look like. And between the 1960s and 1980s, it took us 20 years before a standard way to communicate between computer networks was developed. And then in the 90s, we saw hunky mobile phones, and it goes on and on, the type of technologies that we've been seeing and developing exponentially at that in terms of how fast innovation has been progressing at a pace that has been exceeding our expectations. And I start with this context because the evolutions that we've seen in Web 1 and Web 2, and now going into the Web 3 space, is changing the way we interact and organize as a society. And we use these social networks and internet to spread ideas at a much faster pace, to organize and collaborate, and to innovate across geographical boundaries. We're able to bring more diversity into the room, as we're seeing today on our panel, to discuss multi-sectoral views of the opportunities and challenges that we see with the metaverse and other technologies that are evolving. Yet the other thing that we see, for those of you that have been in the space for quite a while, is that it's great to see these ideas spreading so much faster, but there's also a lot of pressure from society and expectations and how we can develop faster. And of course, there's incredible FOMO in the space on missing out on these opportunities, and a lot of critique that comes with it. And so what I wanted to do was to share a bit on the next slide some of the ideas and thoughts of Carlota Perez, who I admire for her views of these techno-economic paradigms. And so essentially, we're looking at these technological evolutions and how they shape the economy and how they shape society and the directions that they take. And essentially, the idea is that over the last 240, 250 years, we've had 5 key technological revolutions that typically last about 50 to 70 years, that typically have a pattern. They have an installation period, as you're seeing here. Then it moves into a turning point and then the deployment. And these 5 technological revolutions that Carlota Perez describes is the first is the Industrial Revolution in the late 1770s. Then we move into the 1800s with the age of steam and railway. We move into the third and to the fourth being the age of oil and auto mass production. And then finally, here we are in the fifth evolution in the 1970s is where it began, the ICT revolution that's currently taking place now. And if you take a look at where we are today, we're seeing some of these patterns emerge, which is very interesting, especially in the Web 2 space, where we've seen governments that have been taking a stronger stance and having more discussions on data privacy, notably through the GDPR. And this is just one example of these patterns that we see evolving, where at first with the installation period, there's a slow level of adoption. At the turning point is where we hit that mass adoption and start to deploy. And this is what we're starting to see evolve, that we find quite fascinating in looking at technology innovation and how it impacts development and evolution. And the question, of course, that we have here and that we'll be discussing through our panel is how can we ensure that while we're creating these amazing immersive experiences in the metaverse that enhances society, that improves economic opportunities, that essentially can change the way we work and how we organize, which enhances our social interaction. How the question is how we can then ensure that what we're designing helps us on a global level, not just the economy, but looking at society and how the environment is impacting it and involved, how we can be more resilient, more sustainable, and more equitable. And so this discussion over what the metaverse is or what it's not has been evolving over a number of years. As our previous speaker indicated, there are a number of technologies that are involved: quantum computing, blockchain, haptics, etc. And it has so much potential to increase productivity, for one, through improved training programs for employees and managers. And there have been studies that have cited the higher efficiency and learning retention from AR, VR. And so this opens up a dialogue about the potential of the metaverse for education, being able to take online courses. And these are things that we've mused about through sci-fi novels that we read or movies that we have seen, like Ready Player One, or maybe something more dystopic like Snow Crash, but also the fact that some of the other potentials that we have for shaping our economies and societies, that we have new ways and avenues of collaborating and innovating. So take, for instance, if you're a researcher that's collaborating on some cutting edge R&D work that's taking place in the metaverse, the fact that you can be located anywhere in the world and be able to have access to tools that we have yet to even imagine for tapping into artificial intelligence and big data to create, to do research collaboratively together, to create designs, and then being able to, at the same time, through perhaps a digital twin, being able to have robots that act on those instructions in a completely different geographic area. And what we're already seeing taking place are evolutions in these fashion weeks that's being held in the metaverse. And so looking at the creative economy, many of our economies in Latin America and the Caribbean rely on tourism. So there's the opportunity to explore the interconnection between culture and tourism through the type of new products, such as hosting digital events and concerts in the metaverse, cultural experiences and tourism adventures that take place in the metaverse, especially when we're looking at the type of impact that tourism can have on small communities. Gaming is a natural one, healthcare that's linked to IoT devices, looking at smart manufacturing using these digital twins, commerce and shopping that's taking place through these mediums. there's just so much. And of course, going into the topic of tokenomics, where we're looking at the creation of these new types of digital assets and how we're using both fungible and non-fungible tokens that give access to experiences in these communities. Yet all of these opportunities that I speak of also presents risk and challenges, which we will be discussing in the panel as well. And they center around ultimately the issue of accessibility of the metaverse to the global population. And so taking into consideration communities that may not have the broadband infrastructure, or perhaps it's the devices that they do not yet have access to, that presents a cost prohibitive access to persons coming in. And not only cost, but having digital skills as well. So the question that we look at the IDB is at what level our various society members, various citizens are in terms of their digital skills. The persons that are in this space right now tend to be in a developer space or can grasp an understanding of what's happening here. But there are so many that have very limited digital skills. So how can we help with the onboarding of these persons and bringing them into the space? Because then that then looks at the type of jobs and the new opportunities that we're creating, work-life balance, and being able to have the talent that's necessary to drive the opportunities and the potential that we see in the metaverse. And so a little bit later on in the discussion, we'll also be talking about data and data sovereignty, and these type of data that's feeding these algorithms and feeding these new worlds to ensure that we're putting together policies that are open and transparent, but also protect privacy and are secure. And this is where another topic of interoperability is critical to the metaverse. Just as with the internet, we had the TCP/IP protocols, so too interoperability, that if I have an NFT in one virtual space, I'll be able to jump over into another and use it. If I want to exchange it, sell it, upgrade it, edit it, whatever the case may be, we really need to look at the utilities of this and how we're supporting the functions of exchanging value and assets. And this is where the economic aspects come in, that we have a speaker that will be speaking about metanomics particularly. And then there are several questions on cyber attacks. We've seen Costa Rica. It just recently had a massive ransomware attack that they're currently still dealing with and just recently declared a state of emergency. So cybersecurity is something that's at the front end of our minds, especially here at the IDB. There's the discussion between centralization and decentralization, how we move forward. So to wrap up, there's a lot to discuss, but the beauty of this is that at the end of the day, we're building these, let's call them meta worlds, and these virtual spaces for communities to be able to interact in new ways. The fact that they can offer us tools to do new things that we have yet to imagine, given that some of these technologies that constitute the metaverse are still relatively new. And because we're building communities that involve individuals and organizations and the state as key players, and even considering that maybe AI could be an additional player here too, and how we incorporate them or that whole aspect into the community, it speaks to the importance of creating rules of the game to guide how these communities function and interact with each other individually and across the globe. And the importance of who's in the room discussing and setting those rules is also something important to consider. It's also important to consider that these rules are protecting those people that are participating in the metaverse. And I think of my daughter here, who's constantly in Roblox and all these other virtual realms, doing school and playing and gaming at the same time. And I think of her safety and her sense of belonging in these spaces. We're seeing new worlds evolve here. And this whole aspect of having control over your data, that data ownership, how it's used, but also how we're creating new different types of connections as a society. So I'll stop there as a brief introduction, because there's so many fascinating angles that we can take with this. At the IDB, especially with the Vision 2025 that we have for the country, we're fully committed to providing support to Latin America and the Caribbean and navigating the metaverse. And I look forward to this very exciting panel as we dive in a little bit deeper on some of these topics. Thank you.
Wonderful. Muchas gracias, Keila. Qué interesante. Me encantó tu presentación. Antes de pasar a lo siguiente, me gustaría preguntar a todos los panelistas que pongan una gran sonrisa para que saquemos una foto rápido de nuestro evento digital.
La tomaré a la cuenta de 3. 3, 2, 1.
Listo. Perfecto. Espero que nadie cerró los ojos. Antes de pasar a lo siguiente, nada más quiero asegurarme que las personas que estén uniéndose sigan al tanto de las diferentes modalidades, lo de los diferentes idiomas, etcétera. Entonces voy a compartir la pantalla brevemente. Les recuerdo, por favor, si están en Facebook, se pueden unir directamente al Zoom para aprovechar de la traducción al inglés. So I'm going to repeat that in English. If you're joining us on Facebook, please feel free to join the Zoom. You have the link here. Just please register, and then you can join to make sure that you have everything translated to English. And before we move on, one last reminder for everybody, un último recordatorio para todos. Si quieren realizar preguntas, por favor, desde ahora adelante pueden utilizar la parte de Q&A. Sin más, voy a presentarles nuestros panelistas increíbles que tenemos el día de hoy. De verdad, estamos muy emocionados y emocionadas. Tenemos una gran diversidad de personas. Voy a empezar presentando a Chelsea Brathwaite. Chelsea es actualmente investigadora de comercio en el Centro Sridhar Ramphal de Derecho, Política y Servicios Comerciales Internacionales de la Universidad de las Indias Occidentales en el campus de Cave Hill en Barbados. Ha realizado investigaciones sobre comercio electrónico y comercio digital, desarrollos de la Web3 y su potencial para permitir el comercio en la economía naranja, la innovación y la política industrial, entre otras áreas. También ha sido profesora de tiempo parcial del curso de posgrado Comercio Electrónico y Nueva Economía Internacional y ha trabajado como investigadora técnica en varias consultorías. Bienvenida, Chelsea. Muchas gracias. Por otro lado, tenemos a Mario Valle, de México, que actualmente está también en Estados Unidos. Mario es socio director de Altered Ventures, un fondo de inversión híbrido enfocado en juegos indie, VR, AR, esports y entretenimiento blockchain, tanto en mercados privados como públicos. Es considerado uno de los pioneros de la industria de los videojuegos en LATAM, apasionado por la tecnología, el emprendimiento y la innovación. Fue director de desarrollo de negocios para mercados emergentes en las oficinas principales de Electronic Arts en Silicon Valley de 2010 a 2016 y ha sido mentor de emprendedores e incubadoras y aceleradoras de negocio en Estados Unidos, Malasia, Europa y América Latina. Bienvenido, Mario, y muchas gracias. También tenemos por aquí a Nikolai Lane. Nikolai es fundador y estratega financiero en Laissez Faire Associates, certificado en gestión de riesgos con experiencia en modelización y análisis de valoración, junto con 7 años de experiencia en banca y regulación. Su interés y pasión incluyen la investigación en finanzas públicas y privadas, el análisis de mercados y las tecnologías disruptivas como blockchain, pero su deseo es difundir la educación financiera en muchas comunidades en desarrollo. Gracias, Nikolai, por estar aquí hoy. Y por fin tenemos a Theo Priestley de Reino Unido. Theo es el actual director de el director general de Metanomics, una plataforma de servicios en vivo basada en la nube que proporciona una completa infraestructura económica de extremo a extremo para la Web3. alto ejecutivo de la industria tecnológica, conferencista, autor y futurista de la tecnología en recuperación, centrado actualmente en el metaverso y Web3. Perdón, Web3, demasiados idiomas. Desde el 2013 es consultor en temas de metaverso para marcas, empresas tecnológicas, inversores y startups. Bienvenido, tío. Gracias también. Gracias a todos. Y de hecho, voy a aprovechar que estás aquí en la pantalla para hacerte la primera pregunta del panel. Tío, ¿puedes explicarnos qué es el término Metanomics? ¿Qué constituye su infraestructura? ¿Cómo se diferencia de la actual economía digital? Danos esa primera parte de la conversación.
Hi. Well, thank you for everybody for joining, and thank you for asking me to be here. I'd like to do what Kayla did, which was take a little bit of trip back in time to set some context here. I don't have a presentation, but in 2010, which is 12 years ago, a nightclub was sold in a game called Entropia Universe for $635,000. The virtual equivalent of Amsterdam in Second Life was sold for $50,000, and that was in the year 2007. A character in World of Warcraft was sold for nearly $10,000 in the same year. Somebody won, a 16-year-old won a $3 million prize actually in the Fortnite World Cup. And last year, Roblox generated 500 million for its creators in its creator economy. We are dealing with something which has been growing exponentially for a number of years. The metaverse and virtual worlds and virtual economies are not new, but what we are finding is that there is certainly a definite maturity in taking place. It's giving value to what we thought actually had no value in the digital environment. And it's giving the control back to the users and the creators as well, not to the platform owners. There are some 2.5 billion people interacting on their phones, on the consoles, the games consoles, the laptops, desktops, VR headsets, all in virtual environments, living in these virtual worlds, interacting, trading, buying digital goods and services. And we are witnessing something which actually affects our real world society as well as digital economies. So we're seeing something, Metanomics is seeing something which is blurring the lines of what we see as real world economies versus virtual economies. The CEO of NVIDIA last year said that he expects virtual or metanomic economies to actually be larger than the real world economy that exists today. The pandemic has been a real kind of litmus test as well for us over the last 2 years, just to see how well people have adapted to digital and virtual economies versus their real world counterparts. It's an asymmetric economy here against the real world events. When things go well, for example, with virtual economies, things go well in the real world. When the real world starts to go wrong, like we have seen in recent events with the pandemic, people go to the virtual environments, but they are decoupled. The virtual environments are not actually affected by real world events. So there's a strange link here. So Metanomics, simply put, is the economy of the metaverse. It's the underlying financial and creator foundations that will underpin the metaverse. The currency is cryptocurrencies. They trade with NFTs. There's distributed funding models through token launches, and there's
I'm just going to interrupt you real quick because it seems like some people are having trouble with the interpretation, and then you can continue. Real sorry about that. Para las personas que están teniendo problemas con el idioma, pueden ir en la parte de interpretación abajo de su pantalla y seleccionen español. Y ahí podrán escuchar a Tío en español y todos los demás que vendrán en inglés también en español. Muchas gracias. Thanks, Tío. That's all. Continue. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I must apologize. I am Scottish and I speak very fast. Metanomics also represents virtual goods. brands, and experiences that are more valuable to the newer generations than physical counterparts. So that to me is what the essence of Metanomics is. I see a huge economy growing over the next few years. Certainly over the next 10 years, I see this growing at an exponential rate, and something which operates independently from the real world, where people will base their career choices on what they can actually do in the metaverse. There will be job creation in the metaverse, and certainly new roles which will take place in terms of the creator economy, what I could do in a distributed organization. And I'm very excited to be building part of this infrastructure myself and my company. So that's me in a nutshell in terms of what I think what I think distilled in a small space of time is what the Metanomics really means for me.
Wonderful. Muchas gracias, Tío. Excelente punto y excelentes comparaciones, ¿no? Como estamos creando toda esta economía, todo este mundo, pero ¿qué impacto tiene en nuestro mundo físico, ¿no? Aquí me gustaría pasarle la palabra a Mario. Mario, también me gustaría que nos ayudes a repasar algunos temas para que estemos todos en la misma página. ¿Puedes contarnos un poco del rol de los activos digitales como los NFTs o tokens no fungibles en la economía del metaverso? ¿Y cómo funcionan, qué sirven y cómo, o sea, similar a la pregunta, Tío, cómo impactará en la economía física? Adelante, Mario.
Sin duda, muchas gracias. First of all, hello to everyone who speak English. I'm going to speak in Spanish because the majority of the people that is in this webinar is from Spanish-speaking countries, so I'm going to switch to Spanish. Muchas gracias por la invitación, muy contento de estar por acá. A ver, vámonos entonces por partes. Efectivamente, yo creo que para poder contestar las preguntas que me estás haciendo, Claudia, valdría la pena revisar lo que yo creo que es una definición, entre comillas, del metaverso. ¿Qué está sucediendo para todas las personas que están aquí adentro y que evidentemente no son expertos y expertas alrededor de esto que está sucediendo en el mundo? Metaverso es más una palabra de moda que una realidad. Vamos a partir de esa premisa, ¿no? Metaverso es la meta, ¿no? Efectivamente, no pun intended here. Metaverso es a donde queremos llegar, pero en realidad lo que está sucediendo en el mundo hoy es muy parecido a lo que sucedió con Internet poco antes de 1995, donde definitivamente algo empezaba a sugerirnos que esto iba a ser una revolución, que iba a impactar no solamente el mundo del emprendimiento, no solamente el mundo de la inversión, sino también el mundo de lo que nos compete el día de hoy, que es el desarrollo social, las oportunidades laborales, la integración de mercados a lo mejor emergentes a nuevas oportunidades de desarrollo económico. Y ahí es donde quiero llegar para terminar de contestar la pregunta. Pero revisando específicamente lo que son los activos digitales dentro de estos pequeños glimpses o pequeñas pistas que están coqueteando con este concepto del metaverso, definitivamente es lo que hoy llamamos NFTs o Non-Fungible Tokens, ¿no? Habría que hablar también de blockchain y no nos va a dar tiempo de hablar en detalle alrededor de qué es blockchain y cómo funciona blockchain para entender desde la perspectiva técnica qué es un NFT. No voy a hablar desde la perspectiva técnica qué es un NFT, pero sí voy a utilizar una analogía que uso mucho alrededor de cómo puede ilustrarse el entender por qué los NFTs y blockchain son un elemento que verdaderamente va a ser vital para poder revolucionar y hacer posible eso que todavía no sucede y que es el metaverso o lo que llamamos metaverso. Entonces, cuando tú tienes de un lado, en una mano $1 y en otra mano $1, o si tú tienes $1 y yo tengo $1 y lo intercambiamos, eso quiere decir que ese activo, como tú lo dijiste, Claudia, es fungible, es intercambiable. Yo te doy ese $, tú me das ese $y no pasó absolutamente nada, ¿no? Lo mismo sucede con una imagen JPG o PNG que puedo copiar y pegar y mandarte por correo electrónico. Tenemos exactamente el mismo file, aunque son informaciones distribuidas distintas, pero es exactamente lo mismo. esa imagen digital también es fungible, intercambiable. ¿Qué es lo no fungible en el mundo real? Muy sencillo, 2 ejemplos. Uno, el arte, por ejemplo, ¿no? ¿Cuántas Mona Lisas hay en el mundo? Nos dicen que hay una, ¿no? Hay muchas teorías de conspiración, dicen que hay 3, pero yo creo que hay una. Hay una, pero ¿cuántas postales y cuántas imágenes y cuántas colchas de cama hay con la imagen de la Mona Lisa? Miles de millones. Sin embargo, Mona Lisa es una. Bueno, pues ese es un activo no fungible del mundo real. Otro activo no fungible que todos conocemos son los bienes raíces. Los bienes raíces, por más que estén en la misma zona, no existe en todo el planeta el mismo pedazo de tierra, ¿no? Y a partir de eso es que se ha creado una economía gigantesca desde tiempos milenarios que tiene que ver hoy en día con los bienes raíces. Bueno, pues imagínense eso que acabo de decir, lo no fungible, pero trasladado al mundo digital. En el mundo digital, hasta antes de que llegara blockchain, era prácticamente imposible que hubiera algo no fungible. Podía copiarse, podía reproducirse digitalmente, podía hackearse. Y gracias a blockchain, un activo digital puede ser irrepetible, único, y por eso es que lo que más se puso de moda, y muchas veces, desgraciadamente, creemos que un NFT es solamente arte digital o fotos de changos aburridos o fotos de punks que valen y que se intercambian por millones de dólares, pues definitivamente empieza a haber como una tergiversación del concepto de NFT. Entonces, para terminar la participación y terminar de contestar, yo creo que los NFTs están ahora mismo utilizados, por un lado, a un 10% de su capacidad y mal utilizados de una forma irresponsable, especulativa y poco útil, cuando en realidad los NFTs tienen la posibilidad tecnológica de ser el motor o la gasolina de lo que hoy llamamos metaverso. Para que haya metaverso es necesario que exista blockchain, porque blockchain es la tecnología que nos va a permitir incorporar atributos del mundo real al mundo digital. Y eso no ha sucedido todavía. Lo único que ha sucedido son temas especulativos que, como me dijeron que no podía yo mencionar empresas específicas, no voy a mencionar, pero todo mundo aquí sabemos y hemos visto noticias alrededor de lo que ha sucedido y la locura que está ahí atrás, pero además también hoy en día hemos visto que los NFTs como mercado especulativo ha caído 97% en menos de 4 meses. Entonces, desgraciadamente los NFTs tienen muy mala fama, de igual manera que el .com tuvo mala fama en el 2000 y en el 2001. El .com cambió al mundo, pero costó muy caro. Es lo mismo, los NFTs y blockchain y lo que hoy llamamos metaverso, que es una palabra que, como dije, a mí me parece que está más de moda que realidad, es una palabra, los NFTs específicamente, es una palabra que tiene muy mala fama, pero que tiene un gran potencial.
Muchas gracias, Mario. Buenísimo. Y yo retomo muchos de los comentarios aquí en el chat. Clarísima explicación, muy buena comparación. Muchísimas gracias. Espero que sí quede mucho más claro a qué nos referimos cuando hablamos de NFTs. Les recuerdo a todos que si tienen preguntas, por favor pónganlas en el Q&A porque en el chat se nos van a perder y tienen preguntas muy buenas. Nicolai, ahorita me gustaría hacerte una pregunta a ti. Mario habló un poco de cómo el metaverso está transformando la economía, ¿no? Me gustaría darle la vuelta un poco y preguntarte cómo va a redefinir el metaverso al e-commerce, cómo se va a fortalecer la fusión entre el comercio físico y virtual y de qué manera esto puede ayudar a los comercios de la región. Y esta pregunta nos la han hecho en el chat, como ¿cómo puedo subir mi comercio al metaverso? Que esa pregunta en específico la veremos más tarde. Pero sí, cuéntanos, e-commerce, empresas de la región, metaverso, ¿dónde está la oportunidad y cómo se puede aprovechar?
Muchas gracias, Claudia. So I will speak now in English. So let me speak about the metaverse, right? And e-commerce. I think there are things that we must understand which are important. So recently I read an article about the metaverse, which I thought was very unique. The perspective was very unique, but very relevant. When you think about the metaverse, you're thinking about a virtual market economy, right? Where you have various actors, so like governments, businesses that participate on the commercial end. You also think about consumers from the retail perspective, and all of them have an important role to play. When you think about an economy in its natural form and what it needs to strive, automatically a few things come to mind. Competition, which allows a constant cycle of disruption and displacement, a large number of profitable enterprises, or we could think about it as a significant concentration of small to medium-sized enterprises, capital mobility, flows of money and investment in the economy, and strong consumer spending. Now, when I think about businesses specifically and e-commerce, I believe at its core, there's a benefit for businesses from different physical locations, right, to participate in a singular market economy. So what does that do? Really and truthfully, it helps from the perspective of trade barriers that currently exist, the impact of world borders and treaties, or even sanctions. And right now is yet to be seen that those are considerations in the metaverse. So at its core, businesses will be able to trade freely without geographic constraints, right? Now I want to go further into that question when we look at how will it strengthen the merging of physical and virtual commerce, right? The metaverse. And I think to answer this question, it's best to use an analogy or watch an illustration, right? So imagine you went to the nearest Macy's store and you saw an item on the shelf, right? And you thought, okay, well, this would be nice to wear with my outfit. Yeah. So you go in the store and you feel the item, you touch the fabric, you have an idea of how it would look on you. And this example is commonly seen in more like a brick and mortar concept where you actually walk into a physical location. Now let's think about it now from an e-commerce side. You could look at it on a platform like Amazon. You saw the same item. Conducting the transaction is quick and seamless. You're in the comfort of your home. The product details are there. But what the metaverse really is going to do is actually merge those previously two separate worlds and converge them to create a more immersive experience for the consumer, right? I think that brands will be able to take like social proof beyond just our review. So like just rating an item online, I think you'll now have communities speaking about these products. I think you'll have more engagement about the brands. And then as Mario spoke about NFTs and their contribution, which would be a key element in the metaverse, looking at their unique purposes and how they would improve like the shopping experience, right? In terms of benefiting the region, though, that's where it gets ticklish or tricky, right? So I'm just going to give you some stats, which were, some was highlighted by Glenda, which I appreciated. So I'm just going to add to that. So basically, the United Nations and the World Bank had put some information online. Right now, as you know, there are like 33 territories in Latin America and the Caribbean. And out of those 33 territories, only 2 territories have a gross domestic product of over $1 trillion, right? 1/3 of those territories actually have a gross domestic product of less than $15 billion, right? And when you look at the total, you look at something of just a bit more than $4 trillion in GDP, right? When you then take that into context and look at the US economy, you're looking at an economy that's over like $20 trillion, right? So whenever you think about the metaverse, I have to look at, okay, how can Latin America and Caribbean territories benefit in terms of actually competing in this global market, right? And how can we improve those statistics? And I think it's good to utilize the metaverse to actually be used as a tool to promote and increase the total value, not just being promoted, but actually being sold on these platforms to persons living in other jurisdictions, right? And also persons who want to be involved in buying products from a different territory. So I think that when we think about trade and we think about the metaverse and we also think about e-commerce, all of those are considerations that need to be made. And I do believe that there is huge potential and benefit for Latin America and the Caribbean to utilize this tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai. That's really interesting. Gracias, Nikolai. Qué interesante que hagas el punto sobre la tienda de ropas, porque justamente alguien nos hizo una pregunta sobre ese tema exactamente en el chat. Buenísimo. Chelsea, quisiera también que nos puedas dar una perspectiva de, ok, bueno, sí, se puede crear más comercios, es una oportunidad nueva de expansión o de creación de elementos nuevos, pero realmente, ¿cómo se puede crear un comercio más justo y equitativo a través del metaverso? ¿Y qué elementos se deberían considerar para lograr eso?
Gracias, Claudia, y para la pregunta y para la oportunidad de estar aquí hoy. Voy a hablar en inglés. So just to take a step back for those who may not have a trade background. So Nikolai would have spoken to e-commerce and some of the opportunities that are there. But when we look at the multilateral trading system currently in its traditional format, it's governed by the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. And the World Trade Organization is guided by some key underlying principles, which they believe will theoretically promote fairer and more equitable trade. So some of these would include things like trade without discrimination. So things like the most favored nation and national treatment principles.
Sorry, I might ask you to speak a little bit slower for our interpreter. Thanks.
No problem. All right. So as I was saying, some of these principles seek to promote fairer and more equitable trade. So trade without discrimination, for example, we have the most favored nation and the national treatment principles. We also have freer trade gradually through negotiation. So that's reducing and ultimately eliminating trade barriers, both tariff and non-tariff barriers. There's also predictability through binding and transparency. So promises of member states not to raise or reintroduce barriers, and ultimately the promotion of open, fair, and undistorted competition, among others. So just taking a brief look or having that brief crash course at the WTO and their guiding principles and how they're governing multilateral trade, there are already some constructs of what the metaverse could theoretically lend itself to help create fairer and more equitable trade. Now, as Mario said, this would be the ultimate metaverse, not what we're seeing now, but if it was in its utopia and everything was there. So there are things, for example, like the virtual existence of the metaverse alone. That's going to theoretically overcome traditional barriers to international trade. Before, you needed huge expenditure on a global physical presence to have a global reach. But imagine now that we have the global world in this single virtual space. That creates more advantageous access theoretically for the smaller players. They don't have to go and look for this expenditure. Also, as Mario said, if the metaverse is going to be fueled by blockchain, that's going to play a very critical role in promoting an even greater level of predictability and transparency in this new trading environment. So already we've seen things like smart contracts, and it's been argued that blockchain, when compared to other solutions, it offers this unique level of protection, trust, and transparency for every party that's not necessarily easily achievable otherwise. So already we've seen some use cases of how NFTs powered by smart contracts are being used to secure intellectual property rights, which is going to be particularly important for trade in creative goods and services. And on the premise that, or to the extent I should say, that the metaverse is going to be built on open source technologies and the applications thereof, there are also opportunities then for smaller companies from developing countries to learn and adapt and leverage these same tools, these same apps, using this open source platform to be able to compete, so to speak, with their bigger counterparts in these advanced economies, which theoretically can help to promote fairer competition. But as you might have noticed, I was very, very careful to say theoretically in all the instances, because as Mario would have hinted earlier, we're not there yet. But even beyond looking at it from a technical perspective, I want to look at it from a trade perspective. And there's one trade policy expert especially who he's done some work here. And as he said, when more economic activity and interaction moves into the metaverse, what's going to happen is that greater regulatory scrutiny and attention is going to follow. Because right now, it's a nice to have, but it's not necessarily taken away from domestic jobs. It's not doing any of that as yet. But once that begins to happen and you have this virtual world where the majority of economic activity is happening, then the old world challenges are actually going to be magnified. So we're going to start to see some protectionist measures begin to emerge. So for example, although we think that the metaverse can't afford service suppliers the opportunities to remotely supply their services worldwide, imagine if this begins to affect the local job opportunities. What then is the possibility that local governments may step in and seek to impose virtual work permits, what's the possibility as well then, when we look at cross-border data flows, already we've seen the protectionist measures that countries have taken in restricting data localization and all of those other measures. There's also censorship. When these things happen, it can really limit the access to some parts of the metaverse that users in certain geographic locations will have. So again, what we thought would have been, the world at the touch of a virtual space then becomes this segmented reality again because of the restrictions that we're seeing. Additionally, when we start to see a greater push towards trade in fully digitizable goods, what's going to happen is some countries may even look to impose tariffs on virtual transfers because now they want to compensate for the shortfall in government revenue from goods trade. So there's also the issue of qualifications. So let's say, for example, there's a doctor here in Barbados and he's providing telemedicine services on this metaverse platform, right? What qualifications must he have compared to a doctor doing the same thing in the same metaverse space, but who's based in Mexico? How are we qualifying the standards? Is it that they're going to get a metaverse certificate for practicing, what the case may be? So these are all very critical questions that we're going to need to consider, because it's easy to say, well, yeah, there's so many opportunities in the metaverse, but what if the metaverse creates a reality that just augments or magnifies old world challenges that we still have? And if that happens, I should say, then the metaverse will not necessarily deliver fair and more equitable trade. So for me, it is for us to sit and really think, well, what levels of trade policy is going to be needed in this space? What levels of protection we need? And I even saw an article titled, will there need to be a free trade agreement in the metaverse? So it's that type of critical thinking that we're going to need going forward.
Wonderful, Chelsea. That was such a good overview of the whole topic. I'm loving the entire conversation in this panel. Thank you, and thank you all of you. So you mentioned the topic of jobs, which is one that has been mentioned a lot when it comes to the metaverse. And I'd like to ask you, Mario. Perdón, confusión de idiomas. Mario, me gustaría preguntarte, ¿cómo el metaverso puede impulsar la creación de talento de desarrolladores y creadores en Latinoamérica? Y por otro lado, bueno, sí, creo que es evidente que va a haber como este desarrollo de talento de parte de personas como más técnicas, pero también cómo puede promover la existencia de más oportunidades laborales para roles más tradicionales que tal vez sean sorprendentes. ¿Y cuáles serían esto? También les voy a pedir, por favor, hacer respuestas más cortas. Me gustaría que sigan haciéndolas como lo están haciendo, pero el tiempo nos va a faltar.
Por supuesto,
gracias.
Y feel free to interrupt me. Interrúmpeme si se me va la boca siempre. Bueno, muy rápido. Creo que aquí es donde está la clave de la gran oportunidad que tiene América Latina y otros mercados emergentes. Yo llevo 15 años aproximadamente trabajando relacionado indirecta o directamente con mercados emergentes, no nada más América Latina, sino el sudeste asiático. He estado y he tenido la oportunidad de estar también en el centro-este de Europa, apoyando a developers y a desarrolladores. Y acabas de tocar un punto fundamental. Cuando algo todavía no sucede desde el punto de vista de convergencia tecnológica, es ahí donde hay una gran oportunidad. Déjame revisar de manera histórica muy rápido qué pasó con los dos ciclos anteriores de revolución tecnológica. Digamos que ha habido tres grandes, en la era digital, ha habido tres grandes revoluciones tecnológicas. La primera fue la revolución de la computadora personal, ¿no? Esta computadora personal que era el mover ese gran poder de cómputo a nuestras casas, y en los 80s, a mediados de los 80s, esto hizo que muchísima gente en todo el mundo tuviera la oportunidad de utilizar no técnico. Es importante empezar a rascar a esta parte que estás diciendo, Claudia, para que la respuesta sea más breve. La oportunidad que le dio la PC al mundo entero no fue solamente para los programadores. La razón de que Microsoft con Word, con Excel, con PowerPoint, en ese entonces haya sido una explosión y un fenómeno, y muchas otras compañías de software en estas computadoras personales, es justamente que le dio una herramienta a personas no técnicas. El tema es que América Latina ni llegó a la fiesta. No hay empresas de software gigantescas para cómputo personal legendarias en América Latina. La siguiente gran revolución fue Internet. Internet en 1995 explota de una manera impresionante en todo el mundo, ¿no? En 1995 había 16 millones de usuarios de Internet, hoy hay 5,000 millones de usuarios de Internet, si no es que un poco más. Pero el punto al que voy es que Internet también trajo oportunidades a nivel emprendimiento y a nivel revolución completa. De ahí salió Google, de ahí salió Netscape en su momento, de ahí salió lo que se les ocurra, que son las grandes empresas, Amazon, por ejemplo, que revolucionaron, no nada más para personas técnicas, el desarrollo y oportunidades de trabajo, oportunidades de talento. La tercera revolución fue la telefonía móvil, los smartphones, que de nuevo fue la convergencia entre el cómputo personal, Internet y la portabilidad. Y pues tampoco tendría yo que decir de manera muy extensa que las oportunidades que la revolución de Internet mobile le dio a gente no técnica es inmensa. Y no solamente la oportunidad a nivel desarrollo, a nivel emprendimiento, etcétera, fue algo revolucionario, sino también en términos de desarrollo social. Muchas de las aplicaciones de smartphones que hoy en día cambiaron al mundo justamente fueron desarrolladas para pues, resolver un problema social. Me estás diciendo que un momento, adelante.
Perfecto. Más bien te estaba diciendo que 1 minuto.
1 minuto, perfecto. Entonces nada más termino. Entonces la idea para decir, no tiene que ser diferente esta última revolución. Esta última revolución, para dejar de usar la palabra metaverso, es la convergencia entre 3 tecnologías. Número 1, la tecnología inmersiva. ¿Qué es la tecnología inmersiva? Realidad virtual y realidad aumentada. Lo que nos haga parecer que estamos en un ambiente virtual. Y esto es algo que llevan los videojuegos haciendo desde hace 30 años. Si verdaderamente quieren comprender la oportunidad del metaverso, nomás échenle un ojo a lo que han estado haciendo los videojuegos los últimos 30 años. La otra convergencia va a ser blockchain, como te decía. Y en ese sentido, esta revolución efectivamente le va a dar una gran oportunidad a todos los desarrolladores y desarrolladoras técnicos y técnicas que me están viendo, pero le va a dar oportunidad a diseñadores textiles, a agricultores, le va a dar oportunidad a educadores, le va a dar la oportunidad a contadores públicos, le va a dar la oportunidad a personas que puedan diversificar gracias a este desarrollo de infraestructura que en su momento no lo es ahora, pero en su momento va a ser masivo y no va a depender nada más de un casco, sino va a depender de muchísimos otros touch points de hardware, va verdaderamente a revolucionar la oportunidad. A esa revolución es a la que hay que llegar temprano. Por lo tanto, la gran oportunidad que tienen los y las latinoamericanos que me están escuchando y viendo es empezar a educarse y a entrarle de la manera en la que puedan para ver cómo pueden, aunque no haya sucedido, aprovechar el metaverso.
Gracias, Mario. También buenísimos puntos. Les voy a preguntar a hacer intervenciones de 1 minuto o 2 porque me gustaría tocar unos temas más antes de que termine. Entonces, esta pregunta es para ti, Theo, y creo que construye mucho sobre lo que ya mencionó Mario, pero ¿de qué manera las empresas pueden prepararse para aprovechar el próximo paso en la evolución de la economía digital? ¿Nos podrías dar tal vez un ejemplo de algo que está haciendo una empresa bien, que tenga mejores prácticas? Platícanos. Nada más que estás en mute.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, sure. I think my single piece of advice is to think long term and take your time. The internet has been with us for 30 years to get to where it has been today, and we've learned and stumbled along its way. And we are very, very early in Web3 and the metaverse. There is, a huge fear of missing out, and it drives us to react very quickly. But technologies and strategies are still very early and embryonic. Regulation and legislation is catching up, but still lacking to protect businesses and consumers as well. I think my advice is to certainly study accessibility. And I think it's life and death for a brand and for a business. If you choose the wrong technologies, for example, that exclude large parts of your audience or your customers, then are you doing the right things? And are you speaking to the right customers? And are you entering the metaverse in the right way? So my advice is to look at what others are doing, learn from their lessons, learn from their mistakes, and learn from their successes. Some really interesting companies that I've seen are Disney, Starbucks, Alfa Romeo, McLaren, Spotify. They're all examples of well-known businesses, global brands that are taking advantage of the metaverse. Disney has been experimenting slowly with virtual worlds for a number of years. And by doing this on a slow basis, they truly understand the impact of what their customers want and how they react to every single change that they implement. And it's all about engaging their customers and their audience in the right way to make the experience and build that experience to be more pleasurable. Starbucks is looking at reshaping their whole loyalty program now. So where you have Starbucks loyalty cards, they want to introduce NFTs. And that gives consumers or their customers a sense of ownership in the company itself. And it also creates a multi-layered experience through non-fungible tokens. Alfa Romeo and McLaren are doing similar things in the automotive world. McLaren are doing a very high prestige NFT membership service and experience, because obviously it costs a lot of money. So they want to give a really high value and premium feel to what they're doing to their customer base. Alfa Romeo are using NFTs to record car ownership and their service records. And then that NFT becomes a transferable asset to someone who buys a car. So it's not just about creating experiences. It can actually be about recording things on the blockchain and giving that sense of ownership again back to the consumer in a different way. I think there's some interesting things that Latin America can learn, certainly from other countries like South Africa, and be early adopters of these technologies. South Africa has been embracing crypto for a very long time due to their economic imbalance themselves. And there's huge opportunities for countries in the same place or the same space kind of thing, and with the same economic backgrounds to embrace decentralized technologies. Sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, I was just saying 30 seconds.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was literally me. I was just going to sort of bring in the Philippines and Axie Infinity and how they reacted to the pandemic. And they embraced Web3 in the metaverse using Axie Infinity to earn money when they couldn't go out and earn money. So there are definite economic opportunities here and lessons to learn from what other people are doing and think long term.
Wonderful. Thanks for all those examples. They're great. Y hablando de ejemplos concretos, quisiera, no sé, Chelsea o Nicolai, si nos pudieran compartir un poco, bueno, hemos visto que el Caribe se está posicionando como pionero en temas de metaverso con la prevista apertura de la Embajada de Barbados en el metaverso. Siendo los dos de Barbados, ¿nos podrían contar un poquito más acerca de esto en un minuto, por favor? Y platicarnos de su investigación y cómo se imaginan que el metaverso podría transformar el Caribe. De ahí pasaremos a una última pregunta para Keila y al Q&A. Gracias.
Okay, so I'll just give a brief synopsis of it and then Nicolai can speak largely to the research. But Claudia, as you rightfully said, yes, Barbados became the first sovereign nation to announce that they would have an embassy in the metaverse. Unfortunately, little is known publicly about how it would be used, but the general understanding that we have is that, it's meant to be approached towards global diplomacy in what would more or less be a cost-effective way. But the key point that I'll make that will then lead into Nicolai when he speaks on the research is that there needs to be an overarching strategy, especially for small island states like ours. Of course, first mover advantage is great, but sometimes we can't necessarily afford to make the same mistakes as bigger players because these are going to be costly. And we're already working with limited resources. And much of what's happening currently in the metaverse is still on a learning curve. It's still developing, it's still new. So we are going to have to ask ourselves, well, what are the critical problems that the metaverse can solve for us? How can we leverage it? What's the infrastructure and framework needed to leverage these opportunities? So really being guided by a strategy on how we're really going to take up and take advantage of the metaverse. Over to you, Nikolai.
Thank you, Chelsea. So I'm just going to add a few comments quickly because I know we're running out of time. But as Chelsea alluded to, a national strategy, our plan is really important when you speak about the metaverse and how it could be useful. Whenever you think about the metaverse, one thing that has to be a consideration, even in building out the strategy, is things like risk. So we all know that in a new environment, you're exposed to various forms of risk. And at a national level, what the concern is really how participants in the metaverse conduct themselves in the market, and also how persons who conduct trade or participate are protected. So that's the consumer protection aspect. Now, factors such as like cybersecurity, identity verification, governance, and data privacy are all essential for small island developing states looking to onboard into the metaverse. And understanding where those critical risks lie, and also looking at what the strategy is to promote or to use the metaverse as a tool to actually help generate income, or to use it as a means of promoting the country. I think that we need to understand what is it that we really want to achieve, and also what are the current exposures. As Theo said, there's a lot of value being created right now digitally. But the reality is that the metaverse is still a new area. It still needs to be explored. And, being first is good, but sometimes it's also good to look at and see exactly, or learn from your peers and see where they went wrong, and also to see how you can improve on where they went right, and try to play on the strengths of it. So as we said before, not a lot of information is there in relation to the metaverse in Barbados specifically, coming from our research, but we do know that there is a heavy concentration and focus of national diplomacy and being able to promote our culture, our creative goods and services to the international arena, also in a cost-effective way by cutting down the expenses in relation to setting up a physical entity, a physical embassy in the different countries in which we have relations. So those are just my few views on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai. And now to wrap up before the Q&A section, Kayla, I've combined your different questions. So I think that one of the things that's really important, yes, let's talk about economic growth. Voy a cambiar de idioma. Una de las cosas que es muy importante es sí hablar de crecimiento económico, pero bueno, como think tank a la intersección de la tecnología y el impacto social, desde C-Minds nos interesa también saber, bueno, pero ese crecimiento económico, ¿cómo lo podemos democratizar? Entonces yo te quería preguntar, ¿cómo piensas que estas tecnologías del metaverso pueden crear economías resilientes y sostenibles en América Latina? Y para cerrar, si nos puedes dar una perspectiva sobre algunos de los cambios sociales que te imaginas que podrían surgir una vez que la tecnología esté adoptada masivamente en la región. Gracias, Kayla.
Okay, certainly. So you threw out a word there, democratization, that immediately made me start thinking. So I think Mario started touching on this as well as Theo. When you're looking at blockchain technology, one of the very interesting things that is preached about a lot, especially in the Web3 space, is this whole idea of decentralization. So of course, we are understanding that, there are DAOs that have been created, decentralized autonomous organizations, that's built on top of smart contracts. And it's essentially an experiment, of how the organization is structured and how people can interact and get together in communities in order to create products and in order to create new sort of social interactions and experiences. And I recently actually just went to a DAO camp, an event with a lot of developers that are participating in this space. And one of the things that we mused about looking at democratization is that decentralization is not democratization, no? And so there's a lot of things that we can go into there. This whole aspect of having one token, one vote versus, we have a lot of whales out there as well that operate in a space in crypto particular, where the more tokens you have, the more power you hold. And so these are different things that are being experimented with that we have to take a look at. And so one of the things that I tend to muse about is when we're looking at the metaverse and these new technologies that are coming out, is what is the role of governments and states in this space? And Chelsea had touched on that a little bit and what that would look like in the future. The reason why I ask this is because if we're starting to organize in different ways, how are our states keeping up with this? And one of the things that we've been looking at the IDB, along with organizations such as Nesta, is that given that we've seen that policies are not keeping up with the technological change and the rate, is how we can support governments with anticipatory regulation by taking a more emerging and proactive approach, more iterative approach in responding to these evolving changes and evolving markets, creating sandboxes, for instance, experiments, looking at test beds in particular, the whole notion of even exploring minimal viable regulation in this space, which we see with autonomous vehicles that have taken place. And I think this is something important because when we're looking at the onboarding of persons, my biggest fear is what I call the metaverse divide. That, as Chelsea was saying, what's happening in the real world gets the challenges that we've seen gets magnified in the metaverse, because you need to have the right devices in order to get onto this. You need to have the digital skills and the talent to be able to access this. And so this is something very important to look at. So how I believe that we can take an approach is through developing and what we study here, innovation ecosystems, and how we can develop an ecosystem that takes a look at the infrastructure, access to broadband. We're moving from 3G to 4G and going into 5G, and there's talks of 6G as well. And where are we in Latin America? And especially in the Caribbean as well with that. That's very scary to think, because the biggest part of the metaverse is that immersive experience, and you need to have that broadband accessibility and power in order to have those experiences. Otherwise, that's an inequality that begins to develop. Investment and financing for these startups who are developing innovative business models. How are we helping with venture capital? There's this craze with the cryptocurrency in the market space that just last week with the crash, which is a little bit scary, but expected, and we could have seen it coming actually, is the fact that how are we raising funding to develop these and how we're designing this. And so I'll jump into your second question, because I was listening in Spanish instead, is then the fact that we have to take a look at what governance is and how we're designing smart governance and rules for the game that our players, individuals, governments, communities, and even looking at the rules of the game for new potential players, these bots that tend to follow us around on Discord, and to try to how we really have to sit down and think about these and go in depth with policies of data privacy, data ownership. There's so many rug pulls that have taken place in this space, and it's how we can protect our consumers with this as well. NFTs is the biggest buzzword that's going on, and everybody immediately jumps on board. But there's also the notion that, as Mario has very eloquently indicated, is that NFTs are a digital asset. And so there's talks about how to regulate these particular digital tokens in the space, because the fact is that you can buy an NFT, and because it's stored in a particular space, it could be gone. The image that was purchased. Absolutely. And so these type of things is where interoperability is my biggest push. And where I really like to look at is competition policy and how we're ensuring that these different platforms are interoperable, that we're looking at standards that are put in place. And so I'll go to your next question then, because there's so many other things we can look at there. I think talent and education is the biggest thing here. It's a huge area that we have to look at. And so the social changes that I muse about is particularly in terms of identity and how that impacts who we are, not only psychologically, how we're operating in these spaces and switching from the physical to the metaverse, but the fact that you can take on different identities in the virtual space and speaking on that. So yeah, those are some of my quick thoughts. Ethics is something that I think a lot about how we're ethically operating in this space as well. But what I love is the communities that I've seen developed and the vision that we have for the future. And I really feel very positive, but also optimistic about the future that we're creating. So thanks.
Can I just chime in very quickly, Claudia?
Sure.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, de nuevo español. Esto que está diciendo Keila, este último punto sobre la educación, quisiera yo reiterar que es la parte más importante, ¿no? Y esto está relacionado con una de las preguntas que vino, me acuerdo si en el chat o en la zona de QA, pero normalmente esperamos que haya programas ya establecidos, estructurados, que nos solucionen cómo entrar exitosamente a una revolución tecnológica. Y hay que decirlo con todas sus letras, las universidades llegan tarde, los gobiernos llegan tarde, las empresas llegan tarde. Lo que en realidad sucede cuando sucede una verdadera revolución de estas proporciones es cuando alguien se hace responsable, gracias a todo lo que hay en Internet, de abrazar la oportunidad de, por ejemplo, si eres desarrollador o desarrolladora y no sabes qué es Unity o no sabes qué es un Unreal Engine, corrige el error, porque si no sabes, no va a haber manera de que entres a este mundo. Y si eres diseñador de modas, o eres contador, o eres una persona que se dedica a las finanzas, entonces trata de entender cómo blockchain y después su consecuente integración y pues convergencia con estas tecnologías inmersivas, cómo blockchain funciona y cómo puede ayudarte. Entonces, es importante decir con todas sus letras, por eso quise interrumpir, y gracias, Keila, por este último punto, el abrazar tu propia carrera no da los mejores resultados de abrazar la propia carrera, dan en tiempos de incertidumbre y en tiempos revolucionarios. Este es uno.
Mario, muchas gracias. La pregunta que íbamos a realizar era justamente la que nos habían hecho sobre temas de estudios, universidades. Entonces, lo que me da gusto es que en esta plática siento que los panelistas han sido muy atentos y atentas a las diferentes preguntas. Ya muchas se contestaron en vivo. Si les quedara, veo que quedan muchas dudas sobre temas como de privacidad, de propiedad intelectual. No las contestamos en esta mesa porque nos vamos a contestar y profundizar en la próxima mesa. Los invitamos a registrarse en metaversolab.com a la mesa que tendremos el miércoles 8 de junio sobre retos a nivel global con panelistas tan emocionantes como tuvimos hoy. Aquí también les ponemos todo lo que sigue, humanidad, sociedad, para las preguntas que nos hicieron un poco más de impacto social, filosóficas, metaverso en Latinoamérica y casos de uso, para que concreticemos lo que, pues, estas posibilidades y veamos lo que ya está pasando. Entonces, por favor, acuérdense que el registro para una mesa no significa registro para todas las mesas. Les estaremos mandando correos invitándolo a registrarse más adelante. Ayúdennos a difundir. Queremos que esta información llegue lo más lejos posible porque, bueno, no hay tantas conversaciones enfocadas en América Latina y el Caribe sobre el metaverso. Y muchas gracias otra vez a todos nuestros ponentes, nuestras ponentes de tantos lugares diferentes por aportar sus perspectivas y prestarnos su tiempo para este evento que en lo personal me ha encantado.